"Stop eating my electricity, Mom." My own son screamed those words at me before he flipped a breaker, leaving me to eat my dinner in the dark while his guests laughed. He and his wife said my old people gadgets were a burden. They thought I was a foolish old woman who wouldn't notice the truth. They didn't know I was keeping records. They didn't know I had allies. And they certainly didn't know that their secret, greedy scheme was about to be exposed to the world, and that I was about to be the one who pulled the plug on their entire life. Before I begin, thank you for listening to my story. It takes a lot to speak these truths out loud, but knowing you're out there listening reminds me that I'm not alone in this. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. It means more than you know. Now let me tell you what they did to me. My name is Ida Monroe, and at 74, my world had become circumscribed by the four walls of a guest room in my son's house. It wasn't supposed to be this way. My life with my late husband Henry had been one of quiet dignity in our own small paid-off home, a sanctuary filled with the scent of old books and the sound of jazz on the radio. But a bad fall and a complicated hip surgery 6 months ago had left me dependent, a word I have always despised. My son Calvin and his flashy wife Shayla had insisted I move in with them to recover properly. Their version of proper recovery felt more like a form of quiet house arrest. Calvin, my son of 46, was a man I barely recognized anymore. The sweet boy I had raised had been replaced by a stressed, resentful man whose pride had been wounded by a recent layoff from his high-paying tech job. His wife, Shayla, a woman whose ambition was as sharp and as cold as her designer stilettos, saw me not as her loving mother-in-law, but as a liability on their already strained budget. My presence was a constant source of friction. The humiliation was a daily low-grade fever. It was in the way Shayla would sigh dramatically when I asked for help reaching a glass from a high shelf. It was in the way Calvin would conduct bill reviews at the dinner table, his eyes scanning the utility statements, his voice full of appointed weariness. "Mom," he'd say, tapping the paper, "this electric bill is getting out of hand. These old people gadgets of yours, the heated blanket, the oxygen concentrator you use at night, they're running up a fortune." I would sit there, my heart a cold, hard knot in my chest, and murmur apologies. I had offered my pension to help with expenses, but it was a modest sum, barely enough to cover the co-pays on my own medications, a fact they knew all too well. I felt like a burden, a useless mouth to feed, a drain on their resources. And they did everything they could to make sure I felt that way. A few days before the dinner party, Calvin came to me with a clipboard, his face a mask of false concern. "Mom, we need to be more efficient. Shayla thinks your heated blanket is a major energy drain. From now on, let's only use it for an hour before bed." It's about being responsible. He wasn't asking, he was informing me of my new, colder reality. He was rationing my comfort. The final, unforgivable humiliation, the act that would awaken the sleeping giant of my own self-respect, came on a Sunday evening. Calvin and Shayla were hosting a dinner party for some of his new business partners, an attempt to project an image of success they no longer possessed. I had spent the afternoon helping prepare, my old hands peeling vegetables, my aching hip a dull throb of protest. I had thought, foolishly, that I would be a part of their evening. As the guests were about to arrive, Shayla, dressed in a shimmering cocktail dress, intercepted me in the hallway. Her smile was a tight, unpleasant line. "Ida," she'd said, her voice a low whisper, "let's be clear. You are not to mingle. You will have your dinner in the den. We can't have you tiring yourself out or distracting from the business at hand. You understand, don't you?" She didn't wait for an answer. So I was banished, a servant sent to the scullery after the meal was prepared. I sat in the dim light of the den, eating my cold greens from a tray, listening to the sounds of their laughter and forced merriment drift down the hallway. I could hear them talking about their brilliant new ventures, about the market opportunities. And then it happened. The dining room lights suddenly snapped off, plunging the entire section of the house into darkness. I heard a collective gasp from the dining room, followed by a moment of confused silence. Then I heard Calvin's voice, full of performative frustration. "Unbelievable," he shouted, followed by the sound of him stomping towards the hallway where the breaker box was. "Her gadgets are going to blow a fuse. I'm killing the power to this whole section before she does." A moment later, a loud, definitive click echoed from the hall. His voice then became a low, angry growl, clearly intended for his guests to overhear. This is what I'm talking about. Stop eating my electricity, Mom. A wave of nervous, tittering laughter came from his guests. My face burned with a shame so hot, so absolute, it felt like it would consume me. He hadn't just insulted me, he had turned me into a punchline, a story of the burdensome old mother he had to endure. Later that night, long after the guests had left and the house was quiet, I couldn't sleep. The humiliation was a physical thing, a sickness in my soul. I hobbled down the shadowed hallway to the kitchen for a glass of water. As I passed the side door that led to the garage, I noticed something odd. The door was slightly ajar and a thick, unfamiliar black cable snaked from the outside, disappearing into the darkness of the garage. Curiosity, a more potent force than my fear, got the better of me. I pushed the door open and peered outside at the electric meter on the side of the house. The small, official Tamper seal from the utility company, a seal that had been there for as long as I could remember, was gone, a small piece of twisted wire in its place. A spark of suspicion, brighter and hotter than any light bulb Calvin had just killed, ignited in my mind. My son wasn't just a cruel, ungrateful man. He was a liar. And he was hiding something in that locked garage. Something that was eating my electricity and my dignity alive. The sight of that broken Tamper seal on the electric meter haunted my sleepless night. The humiliation from dinner now felt like something more sinister than a simple act of disrespect. It felt like a cover-up. The constant low hum I sometimes heard from the garage, which they had dismissed as an old faulty water heater, suddenly took on a new menacing quality. They weren't just angry about the electric bill, they were terrified of it, and they had made me their scapegoat. The next morning, my hands trembled as I dialed the number of my old friend from church, Mr. Otis Washington. For over 40 years, Otis had been a lineman for Georgia Power. He was a good, honest man who understood the secret language of wires and watts better than anyone I knew. I had to whisper into the phone, my heart pounding, terrified that Calvin or Shayla might overhear. "Brother Otis," I murmured, my voice a dry rustle of fear. "It's Sister Ida. I have a concern about the meter at my son's house. I think something is terribly wrong." He came over that afternoon under the pretext of fixing a faulty light switch in my guest room, a task I had invented to get him here. While Calvin and Shayla were at work, Otis took one look at the meter outside, his experienced eyes immediately spotting the broken seal and the unfamiliar heavy-gauge cable snaking into the garage. He whistled, a low, long sound of pure, professional disbelief. "Sister Ida," he said, his face grim, his usual jovial expression gone, "this here is an illegal tap. A very dangerous, very amateurish one. Your son has bypassed the main breaker. This isn't just about a high bill. This is a fire waiting to happen. He could burn down the whole house with you in it." His words sent a fresh wave of terror through me. I thought about the garage. It was always locked. "I have a key," I told him, "but I've been hesitant to go in. I was afraid of what I might find and more afraid of Calvin catching me." Otis just nodded, his expression grim. "Let's use my key now," I said, my new fear outweighing my old one. What we found inside was not a collection of lawn equipment and old furniture, but a scene from a science fiction movie. The garage had been transformed into a server farm. Racks of humming, whirring computers filled the space, their fans creating a constant, deafening roar. A chaotic web of cables and wires snaked across the floor, all running to a large, newly installed sub-panel on the wall. The heat coming off the machines was immense, a dry, oppressive wave that felt like opening an oven. "Lord have mercy," Otis breathed, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and disgust. "This is a cryptocurrency mining operation. These things, Ida, they are electricity vampires. They run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they consume more power in a single day than your entire house does in a month. This is what's been causing the power surges. This is what's been running up your bill into the thousands." He pointed to the sub-panel. "He's wired this directly from the main line before the meter. He's stealing power not just from the account in your name but from the utility company itself. This is a felony, Ida. A serious one." The puzzle pieces clicked into place with a horrifying clarity. Calvin's rage over the electric bill wasn't just him being cruel. It was a calculated performance, a preemptive strike to blame me for a cost he himself was creating. His humiliation of me was a smokescreen for his own criminal activity. But his cruelty, I was to learn, knew no bounds. As if to add another layer of psychological torture to my life, Shayla and Calvin chose that very week to install a new cost-saving measure. They presented it to me as a solution to my problem. "Look, Mom," Calvin had explained, his face a mask of false sincerity. "Since your gadgets are the issue, we found a way for you to manage your own usage so you don't have to worry about the big house bill anymore. It's for your own independence." They had a small, prepaid electrical meter, the kind used in cheap motel rooms, installed on the single outlet in my bedroom. My little gadgets were my reading lamp, my small radio, and my life-sustaining oxygen concentrator that I was required to use every night. "But Calvin," I had said, my voice trembling, "my oxygen machine, it has to run all night. What happens if the money runs out?" He had just looked at me, his eyes cold. "Well, then you'd better make sure you put enough money on the card, shouldn't you? Responsibility, Mom. It's what you always taught me." He had weaponized my own values against me, all while endangering my life. That night, the inevitable happened. The prepaid card ran out of its meager funds around 3 a.m. The soft hum of my oxygen machine went silent, plunging me into a breathless panic in the pitch dark. I fumbled for my emergency inhaler, my lungs tight, my heart hammering against my ribs. After a terrifying minute, I found it and took a shaky puff. The next morning, when I confronted Shayla, her face pale but her eyes cold, she just sneered. "Glowworms, like you should sleep early anyway, dear. Maybe this will teach you to be less wasteful." The final blow came at the end of that week. A new bill arrived from the power company. It was not a monthly statement. It was a stark red-lettered, past due and final shut-off notice. When Calvin had moved me in, he had, I now realized, fraudulently used my information to switch the utility account that was in his name into my name, using only my social security number to bypass his own terrible credit. The amount past due was $1,180. The shut-off for the entire house was scheduled for 7 days from now. I stared at the notice, my hands trembling. He hadn't just been stealing power. He hadn't been paying the bill at all, letting it accumulate under my name. He was going to let them shut off the power to the entire house, and he was going to blame it on me. This was his endgame. To create a crisis so profound that he could use it as leverage to finally have me declared incompetent, to seize control of my assets, my home, my life. But he, in his arrogance, had just made a fatal mistake. He had created a paper trail. And he had given me a deadline. 7 days. 7 days to turn his vile, fraudulent scheme into his own personal ruin. The 7-day shut-off notice was not a threat. It was a starting pistol. The fear in my heart, which had been my constant companion for months, was burned away by a cold, hard, and utterly focused rage. I was no longer a victim waiting for the next blow to fall. I was a woman with a deadline and a cause. I played my part to perfection. I feigned meekness and confusion. I showed the shut-off notice to Calvin, my hand trembling for effect, my voice a quavering performance of a terrified old woman. "Oh, Calvin, I don't know what happened." I'd cried. "I don't understand how it got so high. They're going to turn off the lights." He and Shayla exchanged a smug, knowing look. They patted my hand and told me not to worry, that they would handle it, that they would try to figure something out with the power company. They were so confident in their deceit, so certain of my helplessness, that they didn't see the gears of my own quiet war beginning to turn. My days were spent in a humid, oppressive heat wave that had settled over Georgia, a fitting backdrop to my own simmering fury. Calvin and Shayla, in a further act of performative cost-saving, would often switch off the main house air conditioning during the day, leaving me to sweat by candlelight in my small room after my prepaid meter had run out of the few dollars I would feed it. The heat was suffocating, but my mind was clear and cold. I used that time to meticulously document everything. I took pictures of the prepaid meter on my wall, of the dead outlet. I kept my journal, my little spiral notebook, filling its pages with a precise, dispassionate account of every insult, every act of neglect. I wrote down their words, their sneers, their lies. My notebook was becoming a legal document, a testament to their cruelty. As I sat in the sweltering dark, a memory surfaced, sharp and poignant. I remembered when Calvin was 15, dreaming of becoming a computer programmer. A good computer was impossibly expensive for us back then, but he was so full of passion, of potential. I had taken on a second job, cleaning office buildings at night, my body aching, my own dreams deferred, just to be able to afford that first clunky desktop computer for him. I remembered the look of pure, unadulterated joy on his face when he saw it. That was the boy I had sacrificed for. The irony that he was now using computers to steal from me, to endanger me, was a bitter, painful pill to swallow, but it hardened my resolve. My first real move was to secure a top-tier lawyer. I couldn't rely on just anyone. I needed a shark. I remembered a name from my old community work, a woman spoken of with a mixture of fear and awe. Lena Price from the Seniors Legal Aid Clinic. She was known for her fierce advocacy and for dismantling cases of elder financial abuse with a terrifying efficiency. I met her at the Legal Aid Clinic, a small, bustling office that felt like a sanctuary. I laid out my story, my voice calm and factual. I showed her the shut-off notice, the photos of my prepaid meter, and Mr. Otis's written, notarized statement about the illegal crypto mining rig. Lena Price listened, her expression turning from professional interest to a kind of joyful, righteous fury. "Mrs. Monroe," she said, a dangerous grin on her face, "your son and his wife are not just cruel, they are breathtakingly stupid. They have handed us a gift-wrapped, ironclad case of felony theft, wire fraud, and elder financial abuse." She agreed to take my case, her usual high fee waived in favor of a contingency basis. So confident was she of our victory. "First things first, Ida," she'd said, her voice now a low, conspiratorial purr. "We need to prove that unauthorized electrical load. We need undeniable data. Your friend Otis's statement is great, but real-time data from the utility company's own equipment is unassailable." And so began the sting operation. Lena Price made a call to a friend of hers, an investigator at the State Utility Commission. The next day, a man posing as a routine meter reader arrived at the house. Calvin and Shayla, so used to ignoring the comings and goings of maintenance workers, barely gave him a second glance. While he pretended to check the main meter, he discreetly installed a small high-tech smart logger on the main electrical feed, a device that would secretly monitor and record the house's power consumption in real time, minute by minute. For 2 days, the smart logger did its work, silently gathering the data that would be the nail in their coffin. It recorded the normal, modest energy use during the day. And then at night, when Calvin would fire up his illegal crypto mining operation in the garage, it recorded the massive, undeniable spikes in power consumption, a digital fingerprint of his theft. On the second night, as I sat in my dark, candlelit room, my secret phone pinged with a text message from Lena. It was a screenshot of a graph, a jagged, soaring mountain range of illicit energy use. And beneath it, a single triumphant message: "Unauthorized load detected, data locked." The proof was in my hand. Undeniable. Scientific. I looked at the flickering flame of my last taper candle, its small, defiant light pushing back against the darkness of my room. And for the first time in a very long time, I smiled. A real, genuine, and deeply dangerous smile. The darkness was about to end. And for my son, a new and very different kind of heat was about to be turned on. The morning of the reckoning arrived with a deceptive calm. The air was still thick and heavy with the Georgia heat, but a storm of a different kind was about to break. At precisely 7 a.m., a large, bright orange utility truck, its logo a familiar symbol of civic authority, rolled up and parked directly in front of the house. It was followed by a sleek, unmarked sedan. The sight of the official vehicles sent a satisfying, nervous tremor through me. Calvin, barefoot and in his pajama pants, charged out of the front door, his face a mask of sleepy, arrogant fury. He was performing for the benefit of his nosy neighbors, who were already peering through their curtains. "What the hell is this?" he roared at the 2 men from the utility company who were approaching his meter. "You can't shut off my power. I have a payment arrangement. My senile mother must have forgotten to pay her share." One of the men just looked at him, his face impassive. "Sir," he said, his voice flat, "we're not here to shut off your power. We're here because of a reported illegal and hazardous electrical tap at this residence." From the sedan stepped a man in a sharp suit holding a tablet. He was the investigator from the Utility Commission, Lena Price's contact. "Mr. Monroe," he said, his voice calm, professional. "I'm with the State Utility Commission. We've been monitoring a significant unauthorized power draw from this address, consistent with an illegal cryptocurrency mining operation." Calvin's face went from red to a pasty, ghost white. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. The investigator didn't even blink. He simply turned his tablet around, showing Calvin the damning graphs from the smart logger, the massive, jagged spikes of power consumption from the past 2 nights. Then he showed him the high-resolution photos of his humming, whirring rigs and the bypass meter in the garage, photos Mr. Otis had taken. Calvin stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, his lies and his deceit all laid bare in the bright morning sun. The consequences were swift and immediate. The utility crew, under the investigator's supervision, officially cut the power to the entire house, citing the hazardous, illegal wiring. The house was now officially legally dark. But my lawyer, Lena Price, was just getting started. That very same morning she filed our elder financial abuse suit. And with it, an emergency injunction to freeze every single one of Calvin and Shayla's joint bank accounts and credit cards, citing the evidence of my stolen pension funds and the fraudulent utility bills. The court hearing for the injunction was 2 days later. It was a brief, brutal affair. Lena Price presented the judge with the mountain of evidence. The official report from the Utility Commission on the illegal crypto mining, the photos of the prepaid meter, my journal detailing their daily campaign of humiliation, and the bank record showing my pension being used to pay their bills. Calvin and Shayla, their assets frozen, were forced to appear with a cheap, overworked public defender who was clearly out of his depth. They looked diminished, defeated. Their usual arrogant confidence was gone, replaced by a sullen, resentful silence. The judge, a formidable woman with a reputation for having zero tolerance for elder abuse, was visibly disgusted. She granted the injunction immediately. She then looked at Calvin and Shayla, her eyes blazing with a cold, righteous fury. She ordered them to pay $25,000 in immediate restitution and punitive damages. And then, her voice dropping to a low, serious tone, she said, "This court is referring this matter to the district attorney's office for review of potential felony charges for utility theft, wire fraud, and financial elder abuse. I suggest you find better counsel." Their financial world had not just crumbled. It had been utterly, completely annihilated. At the end of the hearing, the judge turned to me, her expression softening with a profound, almost maternal sympathy. "Do you seek any further relief at this time, Mrs. Monroe?" she asked gently. I stood up, my back straight, my voice clear and strong. I pulled a single, freshly drafted document from my handbag. "Yes, Your Honor," I said, my gaze locking with my son's, whose eyes were wide with a dawning new horror. "I do. I would like to file my revised last will and testament with this court." I handed the document to the bailiff. "I believe it's time," I concluded, "that I pulled the plug on their inheritance too." The look on Calvin's face in that moment, a look of pure, unadulterated and utterly helpless despair, was a victory more satisfying than any amount of money. The judge's ruling was a legal earthquake, and the aftershocks continued to rattle Calvin and Shayla's world for weeks. My revised will, filed with the court that very day, was a simple, elegant, and utterly brutal document. It formally and irrevocably disinherited both my son Calvin and my daughter-in-law Shayla, leaving them the insulting, legally required sum of $1 each. Their great inheritance, the one they had been so willing to torture their own mother for, had vanished in the blink of a judge's eye. The consequences of their actions were swift and public. The news of the seized crypto rigs, now classified as evidence in a potential felony investigation, was the talk of their old, affluent neighborhood. The local news, tipped off by Lena Price's efficient office, ran a small but devastating article with the headline, "Grandma Pulls Plug on Crypto Kids. Local Couple Investigated for Elder Abuse and Utility Fraud." Calvin's professional life imploded. His former colleagues in the tech world, a community built on a certain level of trust and integrity, shunned him. Shayla's credit, already precarious, was completely destroyed. The frozen bank accounts, the massive judgment against them, the public shame, they were left financially and socially bankrupt. I, on the other hand, was quietly, methodically building a new legacy. Deputies seized the crypto rigs, and the garage, once a noisy hub of their deceit, went blessedly dark and silent. With the court's permission, I sold the confiscated hardware. The proceeds, combined with a significant contribution from my own now secure savings, became the seed money for my revenge. But my revenge was not about hoarding wealth or indulging in my own luxury. It was about redemption. Not theirs. My community's. I took the funds to my old friend Pastor Lionel Keyes at New Hope Baptist. I sat with him in his quiet study, the same place where so many had come for comfort, and I laid out my plan. "Pastor," I said, "I want to turn the ugliness that was done to me into a source of blessing for others. I want to start a fund to ensure that no other elder in our community ever has to feel the humiliation of being unable to afford a simple meal or a warm room." And so the Monroe Community Energy Fund was born. It was a simple, powerful idea. Using the funds from the confiscated equipment, we established a trust at our church. Its sole purpose was to pay the utility bills for low-income elders in our community, allowing them to live with dignity and choice. No more choosing between medicine and heat. No more fear of a shut-off notice. The community's response was a testament to the quiet, interconnected strength of our neighborhood. Donations poured in. Volunteers offered to help seniors with their energy efficiency. I, who had been made to feel so small and so powerless, was now at the head of a thriving, beloved community project. A few months after the fund was established, we held our first official appreciation luncheon for the recipients and donors. The church fellowship hall was filled with over 100 seniors from our community, their faces alight with a joy and gratitude that was a balm to my soul. We had a beautiful catered meal, a feast of dignity and respect. I stood at the podium not as a victim but as a founder, a leader, a woman who had transformed her own pain into a source of strength for others. "Greed," I told the reporters who had gathered, "can't keep the lights on forever. But compassion can." As I was finishing my speech, a tribute to the resilience and worth of our community's elders, I saw a movement at the back of the hall, near the entrance. It was Shayla. She stood there, a shadow in the doorway, her expensive clothes replaced by a simple worn-out coat, her face thin, pale and haunted. Coat broken. She didn't try to enter. She just stood there, watching as the community she had once looked down upon celebrated the mother-in-law she had tried to destroy. She watched as I, her freeloader mother-in-law, was being honored for providing the very warmth she and her husband had tried to deny me. She was on the outside looking in. A beggar at the feast of my new life. The humiliation was absolute, silent, and entirely of her own making. My revenge wasn't just in her ruin. It was in my own beautiful, powerful, and compassionate resurrection. A month after the luncheon, I moved into my new home. It was a cozy, sun-drenched condominium in a quiet complex downtown, purchased with the interest from the punitive damages the court had awarded me. It was small, manageable, and entirely my own. The first thing I did was turn up the heat, a small, defiant act of luxury that made me smile. The bills were paid, my boundaries were set, and my life was finally, blessedly peaceful. My work with the Monroe Community Energy Fund became my life's passion. Our first major project was to partner with the city to build a new solar-lit seniors center, a place of warmth, community, and support. The day we held the ribbon-cutting ceremony was one of the proudest of my life. As the newly installed LED lights bathed the room in a warm white glow, I watched as the first group of elders received their inaugural energy vouchers from our fund, their faces alight with a relief and gratitude that was more fulfilling than any amount of money. The local news covered the event, and my story, the story of turning a personal betrayal into a public good, became a small symbol of hope in our city. I was no longer Ida Monroe, the victim. I was Ida Monroe, the philanthropist, the advocate. As the ceremony wound down, I saw him. Calvin. He was standing at the edge of the crowd, a ghost at the celebration of my new life. He looked diminished. The old arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed weariness. He crept up to me, his eyes downcast, his hands shoved in his pockets. "Mom," he began, his voice a raw, broken whisper. I just wanted to say, "I'm sorry. I was a fool. I was so lost. So ashamed of what I'd become." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a desperate, pleading hope. Is there any chance you can forgive me?" I looked at my son, at the man who had caused me so much pain, so much humiliation, the man who had been willing to risk my health for his own greed. I felt no anger, no hatred, only a profound, weary sadness for the man he could have been. I reached into my handbag and took out a small object I had saved from the day the utility crew had disconnected his illegal rig. I pressed a small, burnt-out fuse into his palm. "Keep it," I said softly. A reminder that greed blows circuits, and that some things once broken can never be fully repaired. He stared at the fuse, then at me, the finality of my words settling over him like a shroud. He just nodded, then turned and walked away, a solitary figure disappearing into the crowd. I returned to my sunny condo that evening, my heart full. My life was no longer small or dark. It was bright. Bright with purpose, with community, with the quiet satisfaction of a battle well fought and a victory well earned. I had even, at the urging of the young people at the community center, started my own small live stream, a weekly chat where I would help other grands navigate the complexities of utility bills and fight back against scams and abuse. I don't live in the dark anymore. I live in the brightness of respect reclaimed. I had pulled the plug on their inheritance, yes. But in doing so, I had turned the lights on for so many others and most importantly for myself. And that was a legacy worth more than any amount of money.